Black-owned businesses have a trust gap, which is profound. I didn't understand this concept or the extent of it until I heard my guest, Connie Evans, speak at a conference over the summer. She is the CEO of the Association for Enterprise Opportunity, and her organization just published some research called Mending the Tapestry. So if you'd like to understand what is the trust gap, if you want to be an ally to Black-owned businesses and want to mend the trust gap, if you are in fact a Black-owned business owner yourself and want to understand this topic more, or if you want to market to Black-owned businesses, I think you're going to get a ton out of this episode. Thanks. Hi, Connie. How are you? Great to see you.
Great, John. Nice to see you again.
Well, I'm really excited to talk today. You are the CEO of the Association for Enterprise Opportunity. Before we get into our conversation, could you describe for our audience the mission of your organization and then your main focus coming up on next year? As we're recording this right smack dab in the middle of December 2022.
Yeah, year end is here upon us, isn't it? So AEO is the National Trade Association for U.S. microfinance and microbusiness. Our mission is to create economic opportunity for underserved entrepreneurs. I will be so glad, John, when this year is up. It is a wrap. We have had such extraordinary growth. We went from 5 to 20 employees in about 18 months. We went from about 3 million in assets to nearly 20 million in assets. It's just, all those things are good, but as you can imagine, that kind of rapid growth has just been a little overwhelming. And so we're making it through this year, but for 23, we are really going to focus on how do we stabilize all of this growth, all of the new products and services that we provided, and really try to focus on sustainability and driving sustainability throughout the organization.
Well, I love that. And you and I had the chance to meet. I probably should have teed it up this way. You and I had a chance to meet, I think, towards the end of the summer in Chicago for a conference. And you were on stage talking about your organization, some of the research that was about to be published. Since then, you've published it. I've had a chance to read it. And your most recent report is called Mending the Tapestry. And it's about the trust gap that Black-owned businesses have in America. And so I thought maybe we should start out by saying, let's first define what that means. What is the trust gap? And then how do you actually measure that in your latest report?
Yeah, we're quite excited about having that report now in the marketplace. We define the trust gap as a breach in the relationship between Black business owners and their business ecosystem. The breach is both inheritively cognitive and emotional, and it stems from historic and current racial discrimination and bias. It's characterized by the lack of trust, competency, goodwill, character, reciprocity, and of other institutions, by other institutions in their business ecosystem. And it's much larger than I think any of us, had realized. And we came to the data and the results with a very interesting and innovative mining of exploratory behavior science, as well as traditional social science, qualitative and quantitative analysis. We have an amazing research team at AEO. And so building on AEO's 30 years of experience as the leading voice for microbusiness, we were able to develop and test behavioral hypotheses to further our understanding, relative to 3 key research questions. What is the trust gap? What causes the trust gap? And what is the impact of the trust gap? So my team brainstormed an extensive set of hypotheses for each of those research questions, and then use their insights and merge those insights from the data and the research process. They were able to cultivate really a set of design principles and solutions to help, the business ecosystem what we keep saying, mend the trust gap with Black business owners. And so I'm really excited that we didn't just stop at qualitative, research, that we kind of merged a variety of these different research techniques to come up with what we feel is a much broader, clearer representation of how Black business owners really do experience this trust gap.
Well, Connie, two things that you said just really jumped out at me. One is, I agree the trust gap is profound and bigger than I realized it to be. I don't know if it was on top of mind for me prior to hearing you at the conference and then reading the report. So it's profound. And then second, you do have an amazing research team. We'll only cover one or two of the piece of research that you publish, but anyone that goes to your website, and we'll link to that in the show notes, there's a ton of really interesting research. So there's a pandemic. I don't need to tell you that. I'm curious your thought. How did the pandemic influence the trust gap and impact both Black owned, and also you focus on women owned businesses and small businesses as well? What were the major impacts of the pandemic?
John, I think it's important to say up front, a lot of the inequities that came out from people talking about the aftermath of the pandemic, right? Those were already there for these Black-owned businesses. They didn't happen all of a sudden because of the pandemic. They were pre-existing, and the pandemic just confounded and compounded, the economic crisis that people were now experiencing, because everybody had to experience, but those pre-existing conditions were already there. At one point in the pandemic, it was actually reported by like McKinsey Group and McKinsey and Company that as high as 40% of Black businesses actually closed during the early pandemic phase. Now, many of those businesses have been able to reopen, even though they are still struggling in what's called, this great recovery right now. But businesses had to pivot their strategy and create a digital presence. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, Black business owners did not have a digital presence. Not all of them, but many of them actually didn't have a digital presence. So not only was the challenge to have to pivot the strategy, and then secondly, kind of execute e-commerce strategy. We're not even talking about e-commerce yet. We were talking about having a digital presence, having a website, having all of those things set up. So many of the Black businesses were standing at a place where you have a shutdown. So there wasn't a bunch of consultants and a place they could just go to get those services, particularly as they watch their cash flow all of a sudden dry up. Many of the organizations, like AEO has over 2,700 member organizations who provide capital and business support services. Well, they had to shut down. Many of them who tried to operate digitally actually didn't have the technical expertise to help these business owners get a digital presence. So we were able to quickly pull together our partners, many corporate partners like Plink and GoDaddy, MasterCard, Facebook, and others, pull them together to create a suite of digital services that we could provide to our entrepreneurs. And so we had probably about 3,000 Black-owned businesses use like our GoDaddy offering to actually get a digital presence, and some other things. We were able to bring bookkeeping, et cetera, other kinds of services, all for free during the entire time of the pandemic. And so we were able to help people make those kinds of changes, but it still has been difficult. Now, in some cases that, we had what was called after the George Floyd death, the murder, people were calling this great reckoning, that the consciousness and awareness of all folks in society, including whites, really rose. You saw more attention being given to Black-owned businesses. You had companies like Grubhub and Yelp began to actually label the listings on their, on their sites what companies were Black owned. And so that really did, many of the businesses who were able to get that kind of digital presence, they were able to see, sales go up. They got new customers. But unfortunately, for some, again, not all, but for a great many, once that kind of racial reckoning period or Black Lives Matter movement kind of waned, a lot of those sales went away. And people got back. It's interesting, my sister and I talk about how, everybody was shut in the house. You couldn't, you had to watch TV or do something because you were shut in. And so that drove a lot of attention. But again, those sales have begun to wane. And so I think people now, Black business owners, recognize the importance of having a digital presence. The world is moving to digital sales. And so they know they have to keep that going and figure it out. But so, many of them are also retails, and they are brick and mortar retails in their communities. So I think we still have some work to help businesses understand that digital is not moving out brick and mortar. They have to complement each other. And so finding, the curriculum, the right content, the right conversations to bring networks and things, to bring people together to kind of get a balancing act between how do they have and support a digital presence and e-commerce, and how, if they're in retail in particular, how do you blend that with the brick and mortar and try to run both strategies?
It's really interesting what you said about how the pandemic and move, digitally transforming small businesses or even starting it. And it's great to see GoDaddy and others partner with you to step up. It feels like as it pertains to the trust gap, you already have trust built in with your partner members. And so they look at a service offering that you can provide for free and feel really good about it. That being said, not every Black-owned business has a relationship with you or even knows about you. And so, so just taking a step back, and I know we can't solve this in one conversation, but what are the steps as you see them to address the trust gap in this country?
Well, first, it's an excellent question. And we all have a role to play, right? I think one of the things that, we have to do is first just acknowledge that it exists. Like you said, you didn't even realize, how complex, how big this issue is, how profound the issue is. And so we know it can be a barrier to growth. So what we need people to do is, one, be willing to bring their whole self into the situation and recognize that everybody has a role to play in trying to really close this gap. We think it's important that, again, what we try to do is give principles, right? Real behaviors, not some theoretical recommendations, but some guiding principles that people can apply behaviorally into their real world. So, for example, commit to building relationships. It really does take a commitment. You have to step out. You have to be willing within institutions to address that there is this gap between how you maybe have been doing business and the unconscious, often, bias that is present, right? So make a commitment to have relationships, honoring Black business owners, listening to Black business owners, fitting them into your programs, right? If it's in the community, ask them for their advice, have them as speakers, care about what they're doing, showing up as an ally to those businesses is one, but make a commitment. Secondly, to extend trust to Black-owned businesses with sustainable commitments, right? By addressing the practices that have resulted in these inequities and the mis and distrust there. Actually making, again, supporting Black businesses a priority, making sure it's not just, a couple of individuals, or you're going to assign it to the Black folks who work there in your company, but that it's real coming from the leadership, and that it's a solid commitment that we're going to change the way we've been doing things to actually extend trust. Our third thing is to cultivate inclusivity. It's interesting that we count people oftentimes as being diverse. We can count how many people of color are part of our institutions or organizations, but there's a difference between diversity and inclusivity. And so move now and actually cultivate inclusivity. Again, making real commitments about hiring practices, designing diverse panels and events, talking and getting an understanding of what the real needs of Black business owners are. And again, kind of include them in those conversations. A fourth practice, if you will, is just practicing candor, right? Being reflective to the harms and the goof ups, right? That sometimes we make, even those that are not in policy, but they just happen. Owning up to that, really being candid about it, agree to implement changes, make those changes transparent, make them public. And again, just be candid about wanting to change the behavior and being specific about what that behavior used to look like and what the new behavior that you want to ascribe to. And then lastly, which is actually probably one of the most difficult ones, but it's truly worth it, is recognizing trauma. I mean, the stress and potential trauma that Black business owners experience in some of their interactions with their business ecosystem. I mean, it's just crazy. One of the reasons, my background is actually a master level psychologist, and one of the reasons I wanted us to do this study was really about the stress and the psychological, emotional issues that I thought were present. And that was before we even started any of the research. My theory, my hypothesis going into this research study was that Blacks typically, and again, I've had people read this study and say, and they've never been an entrepreneur. They work in corporate America. They go like, "You just described my life at work." So it's the level of stress and mistrust is not just in entrepreneurship, but since that's what we do, that's where we focus it. But that my theory or my hypothesis was that when Black business owners are triggered, we are so used to just taking it and moving on because that's our life here in America, that in that trigger and that heightened level of stress, they may be making business decisions that are not the best decisions for the company. And so if we could figure out and help people understand when they're being triggered because of the lack of trust, then we might could do something then to help them be aware of that, stop, and make better decisions for the business. So being able to recognize that trauma, recognize you've put someone in that stress mode and they're reacting from that. And you could, let's say you're at a bank and you're the banker and you tell this person no, they're going to get anything, and they know someone with their same profile just got a loan from you. They're upset. Instead of escalating that, you could easily say, you know what? I'm gonna step back. Let's talk in a private room. Let me give you a chance to think more about this. Give them a glass of water, but create some space and distance. That's what we mean by, again, kind of recognizing the trauma and creating a situation where that person can kind of diffuse themselves, take a breath, and then be ready to respond to you or react or interact with you.
Connie, there's so much there, and there's a lot of work to do. Clearly, and the trust gap, like I was saying before, wasn't something that was top of mind for me and is profound. As you describe these steps, they do seem achievable. Is that fair to say?
Yes, very much so. It just takes awareness, willingness, authenticity to begin to try to have these relationships, creating safe environments. I mean, it's just, again, it's just being conscious and making that commitment that you want to be an ally, and understanding what allyship really means.
Absolutely. So I recommend anyone who's listening to this that wants to read the report, you can search for Mending the Tapestry um, and Trust Gap in Google. And then you can also go to Connie's website. We'll put that in the show notes. I do want to shift gears because there's another really important thing that I learned from a different report of yours talking about micro businesses. So in my organization and many organizations, we refer to SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses. Your organization doesn't use that phrase really. You talk a lot about micro business. Can you define that term? And then also talk about, for folks that were as surprised as me, how many micro businesses there are in the U.S. and their impact on the economy.
Yeah, and it's so funny because you said your people, kind of your universe, uses small, medium. And so, again, my research team and other folks in my organization sometimes use SMB, and we mean small and micro, right? Small micro businesses. So a micro business, John, is a business. It's clearly defined by government, actually. A business with 5 or fewer employees, including the owner. Now, here's the big news. 92% of all businesses in this country are micro. Not 92% are small businesses. 92% of all businesses in this country is micro. And so I think that's like one of the biggest news. People just don't realize that. They think, oh no, a small business is what's out here, and it's 500 employees or less. And it's just not the case. But the impact, because people tend to think about micro as being, a business with less than 5 people. If you're a Black-owned business, 97% of Black businesses are micro. Similar numbers for Hispanic community. So it's, again, most businesses in this country, the majority are micro. It's similar to women-owned businesses, but I actually don't have the exact number. But again, it's in the 90s. It's a 90% number of women-owned businesses are also micro. Now, the good news, I guess, is that even on an individual basis, people who are sole proprietors and others who are micro business owners, many of them, of course, are able to make a living for their families and take care of their family. I am the product of a self-employed mother who put me through private school. I was the baby of 4, bought our own home. She was a widow. My father died 2 weeks before I was born. And my mother, through her catering business, put 4 of us through college, bought our own home, etc., by running that business. And so women can make this work. Although in the aggregate, that's where we really see some powerful numbers. Micro businesses contributed 41 million jobs to the economy. 26 million of that were direct jobs, right? They were the people who they actually hired themselves, right? They started a business, which then paid themselves, and then they may have had employees. And that number was 26 million. It really represented 31% of all private sector employment. Those are huge, important numbers. Now, I should say, not only were these numbers pre-pandemic, but they were several years before the pandemic. So we had this wonderful report with a great name called Bigger Than You Think. And lots of people used to chuckle about that name, Bigger Than You Think. But we're going to update those numbers. What hasn't changed is some of the percentages may have changed, but we still know over 92% of all businesses are micro. So that number hasn't changed. But then when we start looking at the other impact of micro businesses, we can look at the contribution of all of the businesses, from the direct impact of jobs, the indirect jobs that are created, the induced jobs that are created. We're creating also about $5 trillion to the economy. These micro businesses are. And $135 billion in tax and fee revenues. So it is bigger than almost anybody thinks about. When we released that report, again, it was the first type of impact report of its kind. It got entered into the congressional records, etc., because nobody had any idea of that impact. When people meet me on the street or in the airport and they ask, what do you do? And I say something about micro business, they go, huh? Right? But then I say, okay, name somebody in your family who started a business. And they start talking, they go like, oh, no, he doesn't have any employees. I'm going, and it was their father. I'm going like, that's a micro business. And people go like, oh my God, right? They are fascinated to know, oh my, of course I know micro business owners. And so it is bigger than we think. And it is such an important piece of our economy that one of the reasons that we exist and we have such a great research and try to put this research out is for policymakers. Policymakers need to design policies and regulations and programs that support the majority of businesses in this country, which is micro.
It's a really amazing stat, and no matter how you slice it, has an absolutely huge impact on the economy. You know, Connie, I was going to ask you about microfinance, and so I know you have a bunch of research on your site. However, I'm going to pivot, and for my last question, I actually want to talk about. There's a lot of folks listening to this are marketers, and so if I'm a service provider marketing to micro businesses or small businesses, what advice would you provide? And I'm specifically talking about Black-owned businesses here.
I would start with finding the right partnerships, right? Using intermediaries, using people like AEO. One of the things that, we do a lot of different work, and I'm proud of all of it, but one of the proudest things, I think, is the trust relationship we've had with the Black business community. They trust AEO. We have a database now, over 80,000 Black-owned businesses. Find me a marketing company who can give you that, right? It doesn't exist outside of us. And I don't mean just email addresses. This is stuff that folks, are turning over firmographics and demographics and, their economics in their business to AEO. And so they trust us. They know that if we're bringing partners, like I mentioned when the pandemic started, we were able to get those resources. They know if we're bringing partners, we're vetting those partners. And so they trust the partners that we bring. On the partner side, we're able to help them understand the real needs of these Black business owners. One of the things that we've discovered, John, is that you might have a product that is a great product for the mass market, if you will, but it needs to be tweaked a little to meet the needs of Black business owners. There are lots of services that, every business owner probably needs, but and now because those needs are common and their characteristics are common, but there are some unique and particular needs within the Black business community. And we can help make that translation of what looks like, anybody should be able to use X product. Well, we recognize that that's not necessarily so. And here are the barriers of your product that are keeping Black business owners from being successful with the product. We can help you understand that. We can bring Black business owners to the table and talk with you and help you understand the difference. And then we can work with you to help make those tweaks happen. So I would say start off with building those partnerships. One of the things that, as a trade association, that's really one of the things that we can do. We can help identify and be that person who can aggregate, information. We can aggregate what the needs are and what kinds of responses business owners might have to your particular product or service, and then build a circle of folks who can come together and begin to, what I like to talk about is like designing solutions that are culturally centered or culturally designed solutions. And so it makes a win-win-win for everybody. That's one of the things that AEO is very proud to be able to talk about is collaboration. We do everything in partnership, and being able to bring different market actors together and solve some of these problems, it only creates a triple win. It's a win for the company, it's a win for the entrepreneur, and it's a win for AEO. And those are the best successes where everyone wins. And so that's the biggest recommendation. Doesn't have to be us. There are other intermediaries. Of course, we think we're the best to working with this, but that's what I would say. I think it's harder for companies to try to go out there and do it on their own, again, because of the trust gap, right? And so if you can partner with a trusted intermediary, I think, again, it goes a long way in helping you to build your marketplace. And it builds a robust marketplace for entrepreneurs, for everybody, creates opportunity for all. And that's really what we're trying to push. We're trying to have partnerships, talk to people like you and your listeners about ways to create a more robust marketplace for underserved and Black business owners.
Thanks, Connie, so much for talking with me today. I learned a lot, and best of luck with you and AEO in 2023.
Thanks, John. Same to you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.